Hey guys, Dotarian here, back with another Last Epoch video. So today we're going to be talking about how to build a Paladin. We're going to talk about what Paladins do well, what to gear towards, and what to focus on to build your damage and survivability on a Paladin. Now in this video I'm not going to talk about one particular build, we're going to analyze several builds to show you what to look for when building a Paladin. So first, why would you want to play a Paladin? Well, the better question is, why would you not want to play a Paladin? Paladins are one of the most played characters in any fantasy game. Depending on the game, Paladins are known to be tanky, healing warriors. In Last Epoch, Paladins are one of the best support classes if you play in a group. And the unique way they've made a support class so strong is by making their healing, which is normally a support stat and a useless base stat if you don't heal, they've turned this into an offensive stat. You can play Paladins as a melee character or as a spellcaster. And the damage types that you would normally be looking for on a Paladin is fire, lightning, and physical. Now, before we continue, if you learned something from the video, please drop me a like and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a click. Let's get back into it. So first, we want to look at Paladin masteries and their passive bonuses. In the Paladin mastery tree, we have the passive bonuses. This is the basic passive for what you get for selecting a Paladin, as well as Holy Aura. You get your mastery seal called Holy Aura for choosing a Paladin. You have increased fire, lightning, and physical damage equal to your percent health remaining, and 1% increased healing effectiveness per point of attunement. Now, attunement is a stat that gives you 2 mana per point, as well as being one of the scaling tags for certain classes when you spec into that particular stat. So from the first passive bonus, we see that depending on how much health Paladins have, so if they're at full health, you deal 100% increased damage. And also, Paladins get healing effectiveness as a stat, and also attunement is something that they want to focus on. So based on the passive bonuses, we can see right away that Paladins are going to be focusing on fire, lightning, and physical damage, and also have options for healing effectiveness and attunement in their skill tree. This passive bonus sums up the entire passive tree of Paladin. So Paladins are going to get increased fire, physical, and lightning damage in the conviction nodes. Light of Rhea also increases fire and lightning damage with move speed. You have increased spell crit and lightning damage with Holy Precision, increased chance to ignite on melee hit, and increased strength and fire damage on melee hit. Extra fire damage per spell cast, and your melee damage to proc ignite after you've casted a spell. You have increased attunement and resistances in the Defiance node, increased attunement and mana regen in the Dedication node. We have healing effectiveness on Valor, Holy Icon healing effectiveness in Prayer, healing effectiveness in Alignment, increased healing effectiveness, health, and mana in Duality. So a lot of healing effectiveness, attunement, fire, and lightning damage. Now the other nodes are going to be block chance, increased spell damage with a shield, and increased spell damage with a shield. You have extra armor options, and also we have some extra physical support in the penance node. And of course you do get support from the other classes as well. If you want to pick up Volatile Reversal, you want to get at least 5 points into Void Knight. Typically Abyssal Endurance is something that you want to go for. Health and Void Resist with Physical Resist, and also extra block chance in the Forge Guard tree. Now, as a Paladin, if you're going to be using a sword, or axe, 25 points into the Sentinel tree will get you Blade Master, which increases your attack speed and cast speed. Or you have increased damage if you use a scepter or a mace. Now let's look at the skill tree of Paladins. So I've analyzed a lot of different Paladin builds and also theory crafted some of my own. Let's talk about the main skills that Paladins take and the most general skill bar setup. So on your skill bar, typically you would have a main damage skill, you would have a buff skill, a traversal or movement skill. This is to reposition your character and help you get around. You might have a support or defensive skill, and of course, certain skills can serve multiple functions. So they can be a damage support skill, for example. Now, the main reason why you want to stack all your damage into one particular skill is to do the most amount of damage as possible. It doesn't make sense to try and be the best in every single type of damage. Instead, focusing on a particular skill and focusing specifically on the scaling tags for that particular skill will help you squeeze out the most amount of damage that you can on one particular skill. So in the case of Paladins, The most important skills on a Paladin is Healing Hands, Holy Aura, Sigils of Hope, and Volatile Reversal. These are going to be your support, utility, buff skills, and of course, you can take any combinations of these skills. So let's quickly go through why these 4 skills are some of the best skills on Paladin. So first is Paladin's Mastery skill, which is Holy Aura. Only Paladins can get access to this particular skill. Now, Holy Aura is so good because this gives you every single stat that you could want on a Paladin passively. So if you want more attack speed, you can spec into attack speed. We get up to 9% attack speed and cast speed in this particular node. If we want more crit chance, we have crit chance by investing 4 points in here, and up to 15% crit multiplier passively by speccing into this node. We get increased poison resist, increased elemental resist and endurance. We get passive ward and ward retention. We get healing effectiveness and health regen. So Holy Aura is so good because it passively gives you increased 30% damage, and it gives you an additional 15% additional elemental resist. When you activate it, it doubles those stats for 4 seconds, and it will also proc on all of these extra passives and bonuses that you take as well. So Holy Aura is an amazing buff skill. The other reason is because it's a buff skill, it will proc with other skills that trigger off of buff skills. So for example, Healing Hands. So Healing Hands has this node, Cleric's Wrath. Healing Hands deals more damage, multiplicative, based on the combined levels of your specialized buff skills. So damage per level of specialized buff skill, and Holy Aura is a buff skill. We also have Sigils of Hope. Again, Sigils of Hope is another buff skill, which scales nicely with the Healing Hands node, Cleric's Wrath. So Sigils of Hope, again, another really strong Paladin skill. Sigils of Hope is another buff skill that gives you up to 3 sigils. So typically Sigils of Hope will give you extra spell and attack damage, will give you an additional 3 fire damage and increase your health regen, and you can up to 3 sigils at a time. Now you can take nodes which give you more sigils, giving you a maximum of 1 here, and 1 here, giving you up to 5. But essentially, having these sigils up give you extra damage, cast speed, melee damage, healing effectiveness. So Sigils of Hope is another really strong buff skill that Paladins have access to. The last one is Volatile Reversal. Again, Volatile Reversal is not traditionally a buff skill, but it actually is a buff skill. And the way we can make it a buff skill is by having it increase our attack speed, having the cooldown so that it's basically on, by taking these nodes, we can get it down to like 3 seconds. We have this node here, which spawns Void Rifts. Once the Void Rifts are created, enemies hit by the Void Rifts take extra damage. So again, this will buff our damage by making the enemies take more damage. So we have 3 buff skills, and we have Holy Healing Hands. Healing Hands is a healing skill, but we can turn it into the best damage skill, and we can also turn it into the best defensive skill. So Healing Hands by nature is a healing skill which heals damage. By taking this skill here, the Divine Barrier, this will provide ward, and by using this Healing Hands Divine Barrier interaction, you can turn it into a very, very strong defensive skill. The other reason why Healing Hands is so good is that it's such a versatile damage skill. So Searing Light turns Healing Hands into a spell damage skill. We have nodes in Bane of Evil to increase your healing effectiveness into a damage skill. We then have a node here to turn Seraph Blade. Healing Hands is turned into a melee skill. And then we have Cleric's Hammer node, which will proc Healing Hands based on when you do a melee hit. So combining all these nodes together, we've now turned Healing Hands into a melee skill that triggers based on a melee hit, and it will gain damage based on our healing effectiveness. So if a Paladin stacks healing effectiveness, which is something that they'll get a lot of in their passive tree, in their gear, on their skill nodes, essentially Healing Hands becomes a very powerful melee skill, which is not something that you would typically think of as a support skill. Now we do have Lunge and Shield Rush. These particular skills people are going to take unspec'd because they give you the movement that you need without having to invest a lot of points into those skills. Sometimes people can take Javelin. and invest in the surprise initiative node. This is also a type of traversal that you can do, but again, you do have to invest points into the Javelin tree to get to this point. Now with your skills, you want to ask yourself, do you want to play a spellcaster based build or a melee attack based build? And in that case, for your weapon, you either want to be using a wand or a scepter for a spell based build, or a one-handed sword or an axe for a melee based build. For your damage skills, typically the most popular options tend to be healing hands, hammer throw, smite, javelin. These tend to be the most popular options. I've done 2 particular builds on smite focus builds. I'll leave the link in the description down below if you want to check those out. Now in the case of damaging skills, you want to look at the scaling tags on the skill to maximize your damage. If for example you're going for a smite based build, you can see that smite by default says it's a fire, spell, and attunement based skill. If we instead go through the skill tree and spec into Order of Lagon, this will turn smite into a lightning damage skill. It says all smite's base fire damage is converted to lightning. Consequently, this damage scales with increases to lightning, but not increases to fire. So this will completely change the skill from a fire-based skill to a lightning-based skill. And you'll notice all of the skills in the skill tree have little icons next to it. This will indicate the base damage type of the skill, but it will also tell you what other types of damage it can use. So in the case of smite, it tells me that smite is a fire-based skill, but there are options for lightning and for void damage. You can see void cleave is a void-based skill, but there are options for fire and physical. So based on looking at the skill tree, if I want to thematically make a fire-based paladin, I want to look at all of the fire-based icons to see what are my options I can use in the skill tree. You'll notice for Forge Guard only really has options for physical and fire, whereas Void Knight only really has options for void in their skill tree. So if, for example, I wanted to make smite a lightning-based skill, I can look at the nodes and type in lightning in my skill tree. This will show me exactly which nodes have the word lightning in it. If, for example, I want to go fire smite, I can type in fire to see which nodes have fire in it. So, for example, if I wanted to go for a fire-based build, I can see that the Righteous Fury node gives me melee fire damage. And note that if it says melee fire damage, that means this will be more useful for doing melee damage, whereas I can see that smite is actually a spell. So the distinction between spell and melee is very important. Obviously, if you invest into spell damage, you won't invest into melee attack damage. If you invest into melee attack damage, you won't invest into spell damage. So this is also really important to understanding on your gear and in your scaling tags how your damage works so that you can best improve the damage of smite. Now these scaling tags don't just exist on skills, they also exist on passives. So you have a search node in passives. If I want to look up fire damage, I can see all the nodes that include the word fire in it. If you hold down Alt, this will also show you alternative options on other types of things that can affect your damage. So for instance, we have the shared divinity node. This says that it will proc divine bolts. Now what is divine bolts? If I want to know how a divine bolt scales, I can hold down Alt and this will tell me that divine bolts is a fire, spell, and attunement based skill. Its attunement scaling will give us 4% per point, and added damage is applied at 100% effectiveness. So holding down Alt will quickly show us how to scale the damage on this particular skill. That's it for this video going through the passives and skills of Paladins. In part 2, we're going to go through how to scale your damage using Paladins' unique stats, healing effectiveness, and attunement. As always, have an awesome day. Bye for now.